Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris von Gierke. I am the lead educator here at the Museum of the Battle of the Atlantic. I want to welcome you all to today's dedication and encourage you all to take a tour of the Star of the Hour, the Type 23 U-boat, which saw use in the Celtic Sea south of Ireland during World War II. Only 61 Type 23s went into operation because of their development so late in the war, and just 6 carried out battle patrols. The one now on loan to our museum, constructed by Germania Werft of Kiel in 1944 and partially reconstructed since, was one such small U-boat. I have a personal connection to this one, and I want to tell you the story today. I've never told this story in public. Even if you choose not to believe it, it's a little unsettling, maybe very unsettling, but certainly no more so than the brutal realities of service on any U-boat during the war, when the casualty rate for German submarine personnel was approximately 75%. I have a German last name, von Gierke. That's because my family emigrated from Germany immediately after the war for life here in Canada. The only one of my family members to have militarily served the Germans was my great-grandfather, Detlev. He was a naval engineer and submarine builder. In October 1944, the Type 23 sub you can tour today in dry dock sank with 16 crew members on board off the coast of France due to a carbon dioxide buildup caused by rushed and faulty construction. All those sailors died when the captain gave contradictory orders under the effects of oxygen depletion, and the situation spiraled, resulting in the sub running gently aground. The breathing problem could not be corrected in time. The relatively undamaged sub was recovered, towed, and repaired in time for a scheduled redeployment to the coastal waters of the Celtic Sea in March of 1945, just 2 months before the Germans surrendered the years-long Battle of the Atlantic. The dead sailors were all given proper burials at sea. My great-grandfather Detlev was given a difficult assignment. So desperate was the German Kriegsmarine to get all possible U-boats into operation that the repairs to the sub had to be tested only on a single shallow dive on the way toward France's western coast, where it would launch again. This was to be a mere 25-mile journey from the base at Lorient. What would make it difficult and dangerous was that Detlev needed to operate the sub alone. The manpower situation at that time was that grave. Detlev agreed to the assignment, of course, knowing full well the challenge ahead of him, because what else could he do? The sub needed to be restationed by March 28th. He had 3 days to make that happen. Now, the Type 23 was designed to be operated on patrols by no less than 15 men. Even in shallow waters, with no chance of conflict, it would be difficult to handle solo. Ballast operations and depth control required moving from station to station constantly. There would be no secondary officer watching trim and buoyancy for potential flooding, and surface hazards, if any, couldn't be monitored. A test dive meant that sonar and periscope systems would have to be managed by one person, which required a tremendous amount of experience. In short, any mistake or malfunction, a leak, a fire, another CO2 issue, would likely be fatal even on so short a run. The boat had to go below the surface just by 20 feet and just for 10 minutes, but the risks of that were considerable. My great-grandpa Detlev watched the weather closely, needing calm seas to attempt this. He did not quite get them. Weather reports from that time show that on day 3, when he could no longer wait to complete the mission, there was steady rain up and down the coast. Still, he suited up and entered the U-boat alone. It was and is 113 feet long. After making all the necessary checks and ventilating the sub, he powered up the diesel engine, which would propel the sub on the surface until the dive, when he would have to switch over fully to electrical power. What details we have of this operation come mostly not from any official logs, but the memory of one man, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Zaringer, who passed away 11 years ago. He was the only one in contact with Detlev that day, via HF radio at first, and then VLF when the sub went below the surface. I spoke to him for only an hour in Otterndorf at the senior care facility where he lived out the last years of his life, right on the sea. He confirmed for me that Detlev had been terribly overworked by that time, as so many had, and he was worried for the fate of his wife and 2 children in Bremen, as the war had begun to seem doomed for Germany. They had to keep radio contact to a minimum so Detlev could maneuver rapidly between compartments, regulating rudder and depth control, keeping things going. Mr. Zaringer remembered Detlev sounding very stressed, understandably, but had found him to be a true professional, dedicated, knowledgeable, trustworthy. He was at his most uncertain, Mr. Zaringer told me, just seconds before the test dive began. All systems seemed to be functioning sufficiently, though it was only by oral report over the radio that Zaringer could trust this. Detlev was uncommunicative during the dive. Finally, Zaringer attempted to rouse him. When Detlev came back on the radio, he clearly was not himself. Zaringer recalled him saying, "They're banging on the door to be let in. They insist." By this, he likely would have meant the door to the navigation room. He could give no further explanation of this statement, and he sounded out of breath. He only repeated the belief that someone was in the sub, multiple people apparently, and they were trying to breach that door. Zaringer could hear no banging in the background of Detlev's very few transmissions. Ironically, Detlev's final radio message was almost encouraging. He gave readings of the CO2 and other levels, all of which indicated systems were working sufficiently. But after that, there came many minutes of unexplained ambient silence, and then communications ended entirely. Zaringer had tragically few options. He was able to send out an undersized rescue vessel to search Detlev's general path, but that was almost an hour even getting to Lorient, and then its 3-hour search turned up absolutely nothing. The vessel's passive sonar could only detect active engines or propellers. It was deduced that Detlev had gone way off course and perhaps run aground. A more intense search was just unrealistic at that moment. The boat was simply gone. When I pressed Mr. Zaringer there in Otterndorf about whether he'd ever heard anything out of the ordinary over the radio beyond Detlev's odd statements that he wasn't alone down there, that someone was banging to get in, he did say that toward the very end, he thought he'd heard something in the background that might have been a different voice, ever so briefly. It may have spoken one unintelligible word, maybe 2. A much deeper voice, as if Detlev had in fact been accompanied by someone down there and not spoken of it before, for whatever reason. But that would have not been like him. Zaringer said it was more likely that it was just his imagination that he heard that voice. The sound quality over that radio was so poor. It was 16 years before that U-boat was found. By then, the world had long moved on to other wars. Detlev's Type 23 was located by a Norwegian submersible, and it had, in fact, crashed onto the bottom of the Celtic Sea, dramatically off course, though its hull was completely intact. 2 men and 1 woman entered the sub, and I can only imagine what it was like to know that there was only one thing they could find in there. The only question being, how many dead would there be? They would have operated by battery-powered flashlights in the total darkness, moving from compartment to compartment very carefully. On a mission of salvage of the dead, a critical component is that no body is somehow left behind undiscovered. And so such searches are very slow and incredibly thorough. The searchers, not really knowing anything about the history of the sub yet, were surprised indeed to find just 1 body. It would be quite a long time before they found out the details of Detlev's doomed solo mission and the reasoning behind it. He was in a forward compartment that, because of the sub's small size, also doubled as a torpedo storage and launch area. He was slumped in a chair at a tiny desk. He was, predictably, mostly just a skeleton by then. At some point over the years, a small pencil had slipped from his right hand there as it dangled low toward the floor. On that desk were 2 pieces of paper. These were photographed. We don't have those photographs here physically at the museum. I thought they should only be accessible online to the absolutely dedicated. Sometime before he had run out of air, Detlev had, certainly knowing he was doomed, made out a list. It consisted of 16 sentences, all of the same basic structure. I will read you the 3 sentences at the top of the list, translated into English. My name is Heinz Adorf. My mother made me fried potatoes and apple cake. My name is Bruno Schmid. My mother made me omelets and red berry pudding. My name is Pieter Moltzen. My mother made me spiced cookies, which I ate with chicory. All the names on that list belonged to the dead sailors of the U-boat's first doomed run in October of 1944. One of the transcriptions toward the bottom of the list actually read, My name is Burkhard Sigler. I do not remember my mother. And so I'm left with the question, strange as it is, of whether Detlev's thoughts and actions were corrupted by a buildup of carbon dioxide, or if he really was given one final order before he died, which was to transcribe this strange, sad record of those sailors' humanity. Maybe he did it under duress, but what sort of duress? And who from? Personally, I don't think my great-grandfather was alone in that Type 23 after all. It's one of the ghostly legends of World War II. There's so many, many more than I realized when I began researching them years and years ago. A little bit outside the bounds of my main goals then, and now here at the museum. But I hope you found this interesting, and I hope it doesn't dissuade you from taking the tour. It's all just history. Things that happened long ago. And maybe unreliable history at that. The U-boat will be with us here until August 30th. Thanks for joining us today.